I was 20 years old and still driving my grandfather's old Buick, which he had passed down to me. I despised it. I wanted to drive something cool and age-appropriate. Well, I was making excellent money and wanted to buy a Mustang, so I started looking on Craigslist, and within a week, I discovered something remarkable. A 2013 blue Mustang GT convertible, manual gearbox, no accident history, and only 32,000 miles for the surprisingly low price of $16,000. I realized the ad was only posted 4 minutes ago, so I knew I had to move quickly. I contacted the number mentioned, but it only went to voicemail. I called again, and on the fourth ring, a man answered the phone. When I told him I was interested in the automobile, he began laughing and joking about how he had just listed it a few minutes earlier. He sounded nearly too normal and hostile. He gave me his address, and I told him I'd come over at 6 p.m. to check it out. After hanging up and discovering this person sounded regular, I was ecstatic to have discovered such a terrific offer. A GPS coordinates the location. It was an hour-long drive. It transported me far from the suburbs I was used to. The GPS claimed there were 2 minutes left in the drive, which confused me. The location I was in was extremely rural and impoverished. I drove up to what the GPS indicated was the residence. It was an unkempt, dilapidated old thing. I realized there was no Mustang in sight. I was uncomfortable just stepping out of the car. In fact, I sat there looking at the house for almost 5 minutes, trying to determine whether I should even go knock on the door. An hour is by no means a short travel, but when anything appears as suspicious as this, you can understand. I noticed the blinds in the window begin to shake, and then the front door opened, revealing a man, perhaps in his 50s. He acknowledged me with a wave and a smile. He appeared somewhat normal. I turned off the car and went outside to greet him. When I asked where his automobile was, he answered it was in the garage. He instructed me to accompany him back inside. I wasn't sure why he was guiding me into his house rather than the garage, but I went regardless. He made sure to close the door behind me, even though I was going alone. I was able to have a decent look at his house, and I must admit that it smelled bad and had little, if any, furniture. He led me down a tiny flight of steps and through a door. I heard some sounds coming from beyond the door. The man simply explained that it was his friend working on the automobile. That seemed odd. I also started hearing creaking coming from above, as if someone was walking about. He looked up and remarked, "That must be my wife." I considered it strange that he had to explain these noises. I wouldn't have thought it strange otherwise. He finally opened the door, and I got a quick look into his garage. It was totally deserted. I looked at the man, and as he stared back at me, I realized it was time to leave. I did not say anything. I just whirled around and dashed for the door, but someone was standing there, blocking it. I offered to give them all of the money in my wallet if they let me go. And then the first guy entered the room with a sharp metal instrument in his hand. I'm not sure what it was named, but I escaped the room in the other direction of the front entrance and was relieved to find the back door. I fled into the backyard and walked around the house to my car. I got inside and started the engine. I stared at the home once more. Nobody followed me. I watched the front door open again, and 2 men from inside stood behind the storm door, staring at me. I gave them the finger and drove halfway down the road before contacting the cops. I stayed nearby till I saw the cops approach the house. The 2 men, or whatever number of persons were in that residence, had left. Nobody had resided in that residence for many years. I returned home angry and troubled, but happy that I had escaped with my life. That night, I received a phone call from an unknown number about 2 a.m. I did not answer, and they did not leave a voicemail. 10 seconds later, I received a text from the same number that read, "Look outside your window." I had my blinds down, fearing what might be on the other side, but I had a good feeling. I contacted the cops again, this time informing the guy outside that I was also doing so. They arrived in a startling 3 minutes and began searching the entire building. They caught him hidden in the shrubbery outside my window. He was arrested. His name is Tony Schelling. He was the same individual I'd met at the house. My message to everyone is to not be an idiot when using websites like Craigslist.
It was summer of 2012. I had a late birthday, so I was 15 when all of my pals were 16. Everyone else had summer jobs, but no one would hire me because I was only 15. I began searching for off-the-books jobs on Craigslist. I discovered an advertisement headed, "Looking for house cleaning services, paying $10 per hour." The advertisement included 2 images of the house, one from the outside and one from the inside. It was a normal middle-class home. He lived in the next town over. I emailed him, explaining that I was just 15 years old and that I was willing to clean his house for $10 per hour. He responded in 10 minutes, telling me about his work schedule and when he needed me to be accessible. I assured him that was okay, and he inquired if I had transportation to get there every day. I didn't anticipate my mother wouldn't be able to drive me every day. Oddly, he volunteered to pick me up and drop me off every day. He said he worked nearby, so coming home to give me a ride would not be an issue. I agreed without asking my mother, so the man asked for my address. I gave it to him, and he said he'd be there at 8:30 a.m. Monday to pick me up. On Monday, I met him outside. He drove a black 2005 Nissan Maxima. He had a black beard and wore a Mets hat. He didn't seem to be dressed for work, but I didn't give it much thought. He introduced himself as James, dropped me off and handed me the key. He instructed me to just straighten everything out, then drove away in a rush. I thought it was strange that he trusted me, a 15-year-old whom he had never met, to be alone in his house. His house wasn't even that messy. All I did was fold some clothing, wash some dishes, and clean the carpets with a hand vacuum. The only problem was that it was incredibly hot inside the house, even hotter than outdoors. It appeared like all of the windows were sealed shut, and I didn't want to switch on the air conditioner without permission. This went on for 6 hours till he returned, handed me $60, and dropped me off at home. He seemed incredibly kind, and I felt lucky to have found that ad. This continued on for about 2 weeks, and my mom was fine with it because James was actually paying me. Then, one Friday night, I awoke feeling extremely thirsty and got up to fetch some water. I looked out my window and noticed someone standing there, gazing into my room. I yelled, and my parents rushed hurrying over, but the person outside fled before they arrived. The next time I came in, it was at least 100 degrees outside. I asked James if I could turn on the air conditioner, but he replied it was broken. He advised me to take off my clothing if I grew too hot. I left thinking he was joking, but he was serious. I was quite uncomfortable after that. He dropped me off, and I continued to work as usual. It was at least 105 degrees inside the house. I had to work shirtless and constantly go outside, where it was slightly cooler. The day dragged on, but I just about got through. The next day, on the way to his house, James informed me that he had the day off work. He said he'd merely help me out. I was not pleased to learn this. I'd rather be alone in the house. He seemed to gently follow me into the room I was cleaning. I ultimately had to use the restroom, so I dashed upstairs and made sure he wasn't following me. But in the bathroom, I found an unexpected surprise. Up in the corner of the room, I noticed a small camera pointing out of the wall. I looked around the room for more, and there was one in the bottom corner as well. I began checking the entire restroom for additional cameras. I checked under the sink, but what I saw was far worse. There were 2 massive stacks of VHS tapes, each with a sticky note containing someone's name on it. The one at the top was my name. I almost threw up right there. I needed to find a method to get home safely. James then knocked on the door and asked whether I was okay. I mentioned I wasn't feeling well and asked if he could drive me home. He said okay. I stepped outside, and he informed me he needed to go as well, so he entered the bathroom. He didn't say anything to me for the first part of the automobile ride, and the road we were on was unfamiliar. In fact, I observed that the direction we were going was the polar opposite of my residence. "Where are we going?" I inquired. He looked at me and asked,
"What were you doing in the bathroom?"
I began to panic. I didn't respond, so he asked again in a more stronger tone. We were stopped at a traffic light, so I used the chance to unlock the door and get out of the car. I rushed out from sight before contacting my mother, crying over the phone and asking her to pick me up. She came over as quickly as possible. She immediately reported James, and cops discovered the tapes under her sink. Some of the tapes contained far worse things than children simply cleaning the house. The scariest thing is that some of the children featured on the tapes are still missing today. He was caught and tried on child pornography, kidnapping, and other crimes. I'm glad I jumped out of the car since I had no idea where he was bringing me. I was approximately 12 years old. I was looking for some craft storage because I received a lot for Christmas. The ones in the stores were rather expensive. So, my 27-year-old sister and I looked for some on Craigslist. We spotted someone selling a large tote for about $10. That would result in a $90 reduction. So we checked it out. We gave the gentleman our email address because he lived close by. He emailed us within an hour, asking where we could meet. I suggested we meet at Dollar Tree because it was a short walk away. To my astonishment, he requested to meet at my home. I live in an apartment, so that would be inconvenient. So I explained that we lived farther away. He claimed he could drive, but we said no. So we eventually agreed to meet at Dollar Tree, but only at 9 p.m. I agreed that was fine, even though it would be dark by then. He said we should meet up today. My sister worked the night shift today, so she told me I could walk there and back and just bring my cart to put the tote in. She gave me $10, and I began walking at 8:30. I arrived on time and noticed an old knocked-up 06 Kia. I imagined it was him and hollered, "Hey, have you got the tote?" He came out of his car and said he had left it at home. He asked if I wanted to drive with him to his residence. I replied I couldn't since it wasn't acceptable to my family. He offered to drive me home, but I declined. He stated if I came with him, I would get the tote for free. I had a very unpleasant sensation. He said,
"Hey, your address is 234 Leather Road, right?"
My heart fell to my stomach. I freaked out and fled all the way home. I arrived home and dashed upstairs as if a demon was chasing me. I entered my room and secured all the doors and windows. I also disguised them with black cloths and such. That night, I was shivering uncontrollably. Then I heard a heavy man climb the stairs. Almost no one on my floor was awake this late, and no large man resided there. I nearly collapsed after hearing a voice.
"Do you still want that tote? It's inside my automobile." Come help me get it.
I nearly puked and fainted. I peeked through the peephole and saw the man's back facing my door. I watched him turn around and covered the peephole with a black shirt I had lying around from earlier. The doorknob began to wobble. I crawled behind the sink cabinet and remained silent as a worm. Then he started trying to kick the door down, which he eventually did. I felt ready to die. I took an old broom that was sitting in the cabinet. The kicking down of the door woke up my neighbors, who ran in with a baseball bat. My neighbor hit the person in the face with the bat, and he collapsed to the floor. I grabbed out the broom and gave the man a feeble whack before he stood up and attempted to grab me. I really jumped down the stairs and dashed down the street to my sister's workplace, as if I was going to die. I raced to the nurse's station and began to cry. I was crying and almost puking up, and the nurses looked at me as if I had just been raped. I told them that a man was following me and planning to kill me. They took my sister and called the cops. It turned out that he was a serial rapist. My sister and I moved, and she went away to college.